What started as a quiet legal deposition has turned into a media firestorm. Jennifer Lopez just named Diddy, and what she revealed has left even investigators stunned. With ties to past scandals, secret recordings, and a string of untraceable offshore accounts, this isn't just about celebrity drama, it's about what's been hidden for decades. And now, the truth is bleeding out. It was just after 7 a.m. when the story hit the wires, first on an obscure legal blog, then seconds later picked up by TMZ, Rolling Stone, and a wave of digital tabloids. A redacted version of Jennifer Lopez's sworn deposition, meant to remain confidential under court seal, had been leaked. The document, stamped with a June 13 filing date, appeared genuine, complete with a seal of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. It was 47 pages long and had entire paragraphs blacked out, yet what remained visible was enough to ignite a media inferno. Reporters immediately zeroed in on one name that appeared again and again: Sean Diddy Combs. 12 unredacted mentions. In context that ranged from financial transactions to vague descriptions of uncomfortable encounters, and finally, most alarmingly, to an incident referenced simply as the 1999 matter in the Caribbean. That one phrase alone set social media ablaze. Within the hour, #JLo Deposition and #Diddy named were trending on X, formerly Twitter, with millions speculating what had finally come to light. Reddit threads swelled with amateur legal sleuths trying to decipher the redacted segments. TikTokers were already piecing together conspiracy timelines. YouTube commentators rushed out emergency live streams. Behind the scenes, Lopez's legal team was in crisis mode. "We believe the leak was strategically timed to influence public opinion," said a spokesperson in a terse statement emailed to major newsrooms. "We are working with the court to investigate this serious breach of confidentiality." Strategically timed, indeed. The leak came just days before an expected grand jury review, and only 48 hours after news broke that J.Lo had agreed to testify under oath as part of a broader federal investigation. Legal commentators on cable news scrambled to make sense of what was visible in the deposition. The language, they said, was damning, deliberate and cautious, but unmistakably suggesting criminal undertones. In paragraph 12, she refers to being urged not to recall specific details of a night on a private estate in St. Bart's, noted legal analyst Erin Mathis during a CNN segment. That kind of phrasing suggests not just memory issues, it implies coercion or intimidation. In the deposition, Lopez reportedly recounted being present during high-profile gatherings, where she witnessed activities that did not align with the publicly stated purpose of the event. She listed names of celebrities, business moguls, and members of Diddy's inner circle who were allegedly present. Although many of those names were redacted, one passage, curiously unredacted, made direct mention of Diddy arranging for a financial disbursement through an offshore account shortly after the 1999 trip. "That detail alone is explosive," said former federal prosecutor Andrew Kellner on MSNBC. "If corroborated, it links a financial transaction to a timeline that federal investigators are clearly scrutinizing." Back in Los Angeles, J.Lo was reportedly holed up in a private estate with close advisors. A source close to her team confirmed that she was devastated by the leak and feels betrayed. "This wasn't how she intended the story to come out. She knew this would eventually become public," the source added, "but she was hoping to control the timing, at least protect the narrative." Control was now gone. What remained was chaos. For Diddy, the response was swift and unusually quiet. His publicist issued a short statement: "Mr. Combs has no comment at this time and denies any wrongdoing." There were no Instagram posts, no tweets, no red carpet appearances. Just silence. That silence, analysts suggested, spoke volumes. Meanwhile, journalists descended on court clerks and legal aides, trying to trace the source of the leak. Multiple outlets filed emergency motions to unseal the full document, citing the public's right to know. The judge overseeing the case declined to comment but promised an internal review. Still, the leak had already achieved its purpose, whatever that was. In the absence of hard facts, theories proliferated. Some speculated that Diddy's team had leaked the document themselves, hoping to frame Lopez as vengeful or manipulative. Others argued it was a move from within the Justice Department to pressure more witnesses into coming forward. A few even floated the idea that someone from Lopez's inner circle had gone rogue, either out of concern or for profit. Whatever the case, the effects were undeniable. Overnight, a decade-old question had roared back into the public eye: what exactly happened in the Caribbean in 1999? Longtime fans remembered whispers of an incident that year. A yacht party hosted by Diddy, A mysterious fire that destroyed a beachfront property. A police report that vanished. A lawsuit filed, and later withdrawn, by an unnamed assistant. None of it had ever been confirmed. Until now. By midday, television anchors were replaying grainy 1999 footage of J. Lo and Diddy leaving a private jet together. Paparazzi photos from that era, once tabloid fluff, were now evidence. Every smirk, every glance, every blurred background was under scrutiny. And legal experts were now openly discussing the likelihood of criminal charges. If her statements are accurate, and that's still an if, then we could be looking at obstruction, conspiracy, maybe even racketeering, said Kellner on MSNBC. But even more than the legal ramifications, the cultural impact was seismic. Jennifer Lopez, America's pop sweetheart, had named one of the most powerful men in music, and possibly implicated him in something far deeper than the public ever imagined. The final lines of the leaked deposition, though mostly redacted, contained one fragment that struck like a thunderclap. "I was told," it read, "this would all disappear if I stayed quiet." Now, silence was no longer an option. The footage was grainy and clearly filmed from a distance, but it was enough to light up every newsroom in America. At 6:42 a.m., a clip began circulating on social media. Jennifer Lopez stepping out of a black SUV, flanked by two federal agents, entering the South Manhattan federal courthouse through a restricted side entrance. She wore no makeup. Her expression was unreadable. But her presence alone confirmed what many had only speculated. This was no civil matter. This was serious. By noon, the clip had gone viral. "She's cooperating," read the most upvoted Reddit comment beneath the video. "And Diddy is screwed." Lopez had not been seen in public since the leaked deposition rocked headlines less than 48 hours earlier. But now, her quiet reappearance in the heart of Manhattan, escorted by federal protection, left no doubt about the role she was playing in the investigation. According to 3 separate sources with knowledge of the case, Lopez had been granted partial immunity in exchange for full cooperation with federal prosecutors. She was hesitant, one insider told Vanity Fair under condition of anonymity. She didn't want to be the one to finally bring this down. But she also didn't want to keep carrying it. Inside the courtroom, press access was virtually non-existent. The judge, clearly anticipating the frenzy, had issued an order that morning sealing all live coverage and enforcing electronic blackout zones. Still, what happened in that room was too seismic to remain private for long. By afternoon, reporters began piecing together the day's events from fragments shared by legal aides, court runners, and janitors. Word began to spread. Diddy's lawyers had made a last-minute motion to have Jennifer Lopez's testimony sealed, citing national security concerns and reputational sabotage. The judge rejected the motion, stating bluntly that the court does not cater to celebrity discomfort. The phrase trended for 6 hours straight. Those inside the courtroom described the atmosphere as tense and electric. J. Lo sat at the witness table, her posture stiff, her tone unwavering. She didn't cry, but you could tell this wasn't easy, a court aide later told The Cut. She looked like someone who had made peace with the fact that she would never be the same again. One source present during her testimony said she began by clarifying her relationship with Diddy, romantic at first, later business, and eventually distant. But what came next was far more startling. Lopez recounted multiple instances over the past 2 decades where she was pressured, directly and indirectly, to forget key events involving Diddy, his entourage, and unnamed associates. When she spoke, the room fell completely silent. Even the judge reportedly paused multiple times to allow for extended breaks, giving everyone a moment to absorb the magnitude of what was being said. "She named names," said the source. "She brought out dates, locations, even code words. There were things only someone on the inside would know." The air got sucked out of the room. But what truly left the courtroom stunned, sources claim, was her recounting of the 1999 Caribbean incident, a vague reference from the leaked deposition that now received full context. Without delving into specifics just yet, Lopez described a gathering on a private island, an accident that was never reported, and the aftermath that allegedly included hush money, NDAs, and one very specific threat: "You'll never sing again if you talk." The source said Lopez's voice cracked as she repeated those words aloud. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters, fans, and onlookers gathered behind metal barricades, held at bay by NYPD officers. Chants of "Justice for Jennifer" and "Tell the Truth" echoed up the concrete steps. A small group of Diddy supporters showed up too, though they were heavily outnumbered. Federal security forces had anticipated the scene and had already arranged for Lopez's discreet exit through the underground parking garage by mid-afternoon.
No second footage emerged. No photos.
Her day in court, at least visually, would remain a mystery.
But the ripples were immediate.
That evening, MSNBC reported that 2 other witnesses were now being prepared for closed-door testimonies, one of whom was reportedly a former member of Bad Boy Records' executive team. CNN disclosed that Diddy's legal team had requested a delay in upcoming proceedings to allow additional review of new and unforeseen materials, a request many interpreted as a stall tactic. It didn't help that, hours later, a New York Times journalist revealed an unverified memo allegedly drafted by Diddy's PR team days prior. The memo outlined reputation salvage contingencies in the event of Lopez turning state witness. Among them, booking an exclusive interview, leaking charitable initiatives, and even fast-tracking a tell-all documentary for narrative balance. The leak of the memo further enraged the public. "She risked everything and they are worried about optics," tweeted one prominent celebrity journalist.
"This isn't PR.
This is the beginning of a collapse." By the time night fell, the judge had issued a second order. Media restrictions were to remain in place indefinitely. The court, it appeared, was preparing for something much larger. Multiple sealed filings had been entered into the record by the prosecution. Federal marshals had been seen escorting briefcases out of the courthouse, 2 of them labeled exhibit materials, sealed. Jennifer Lopez did not resurface publicly that night,
nor the next day.
But her team did release a statement via her lawyer. Ms. Lopez appeared today under legal obligation and provided truthful testimony in accordance with federal requirements. She remains committed to the rule of law and will offer no further public comment at this time. The response from Diddy's camp was equally minimal. Mr. Combs continues to deny any and all allegations.
"We will address the facts in court." But the world wasn't waiting for court. It was already making up its mind.
The date was July 17, 1999. The location, a private island in the Caribbean, owned, according to property records later revealed in investigative reports, by a trust linked to a now-defunct entertainment holding company headquartered in Luxembourg. At the time, it was just another lavish getaway, one of many in the orbit of music moguls and their celebrity circles. But over 2 decades later, it would come to be known as the scene of something far more sinister. Jennifer Lopez's sworn testimony described the gathering in haunting detail. She, Diddy, and roughly 20 other guests, many of them high-profile figures in music, sports, and fashion, had flown in aboard chartered Gulfstream jets. The itinerary had been sold to attendees as a strategic retreat for creatives, a weekend of music, relaxation, and networking. But within hours of arrival, Lopez claimed, the atmosphere turned sharply. "There were NDAs on the bed," she told federal prosecutors.
"Typed. Bound. Like hotel room service menus.
Everyone was expected to sign them before dinner." Lopez didn't say who distributed the documents, but she did name a now-deceased bodyguard, Marcus Tank Grier, as the enforcer. Grier had been Diddy's head of security at the time. He was large, quiet, and fiercely loyal. According to Lopez, he stood silently at the end of the hallway that first night, watching who did and didn't sign.
Lopez admitted she never signed hers.
The evening that followed, she recalled, involved drinking, music, and what she delicately described as pressured interactions. It was, in her words, a blur wrapped in careful choreography. Everyone smiled. Everyone laughed. But the smiles were stiff, and the laughter felt rehearsed.
Something was off. It was the second night when everything changed.
According to her testimony, a disagreement broke out between 2 male guests, one a rising R&B artist, the other a Wall Street investor who had helped bankroll several tours. The argument escalated and moved outside, onto the sand.
Shouting was heard. Then, a loud crash.
Lopez said she didn't see what happened, but moments later, a small fire broke out near the cabana on the beach. Flames engulfed a decorative setup of lounge chairs and tiki torches.
Guests panicked.
Screams cut through the ocean breeze. Within minutes, Grier and 2 other members of the security team had ushered everyone back inside the main villa.
No one was allowed to leave until the fire was extinguished.
Curiously, no authorities were called.
No fire department. No insurance claim filed. In fact, Lopez said, no one even mentioned it the next day. "It was like it didn't happen," she told the courtroom. "There was no fire. No fight. No voices raised. That's how it was handled."
Like airbrushing reality. But one thing she remembered clearly, after the fire, Her phone disappeared. She said it had been in her clutch that evening, used briefly to check messages from her assistant in LA.
But by the end of the night, it was gone. She asked about it the next morning.
A staff member on the island told her it was being checked for a virus.
She never saw that phone again.
Years later, she would hear whispers that several other phones had also vanished that weekend. What made the incident more suspicious was a private recording Lopez said she later discovered existed, footage captured from a mounted security camera in one of the rear-facing rooms of the villa. She didn't see the footage herself, but a former assistant of Diddy allegedly told her, off the record, that it showed a physical altercation and a female guest being pulled away in tears. That assistant had since left the country for good. What tied it all together, and what prosecutors seemed most interested in, was a financial transfer Lopez recalled being made shortly after the trip. She testified that Diddy told her over the phone, in a half-joking tone, that he had paid good money to make sure no one remembered that weekend. The line had stuck with her for years. Investigators now believed that transfer, an offshore wire routed through a shell entity in the British Virgin Islands, was a key to understanding the scope of the cover-up. The shell company, named Terra Nova Syndicate Holdings, had ties to multiple music tour budgets, licensing contracts, and 2 Miami properties, one of which Lopez said she visited in 2002. At the time, she thought it was just another rented mansion for a poolside photo shoot.
Now, it was part of a breadcrumb trail. A breadcrumb trail leading back to that night.
The other major revelation in Chapter 3 came from Lopez's mention of a third party with a camera. She didn't name him in open court, but she said that a young filmmaker who had been invited as part of a documentary project was believed to have captured B-roll footage during the trip. Rumor had it that his original tapes were confiscated before he left the island, and that he was paid $150,000 to disappear. In an interview years later, that same filmmaker said in passing that he used to shoot for big names until they reminded me I was expendable.
That quote resurfaced online within hours of Lopez's testimony. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when she described the morning after the fire. I woke up early, she said. Around 6 a.m. I stepped out onto the patio. Tank was there,
just standing by the water, like a statue. He looked at me and said, "You didn't see nothing, right?" I laughed, but he didn't. Then he walked away.
Grier passed away in 2015 under mysterious circumstances.
His death, ruled a heart attack, was never investigated further. Yet now, with Lopez's testimony, his name was being dragged back into the light, as both witness and possible enforcer. As news of the testimony spread, social media was consumed with speculation.
Who else had been on that island?
Which celebrities? Which executives? The guest list, if it existed, was never made public. But Lopez's willingness to finally talk, after 26 years, suggested the pressure to stay silent had finally broken. The implications were staggering. If what she said was true, then the island was more than a party. It was a vault. And for over 2 decades, someone had been guarding the door. Now, that door was creaking open. 3 days after Jennifer Lopez's courtroom testimony regarding the 1999 Caribbean incident, a chilling development surfaced: an attempted break-in at her Miami property. It occurred just after 2 a.m. Security cameras captured 2 masked figures attempting to bypass the back gate. They failed, triggering the alarm and fleeing before police arrived, but it sent a clear message.
This wasn't random. This was a warning.
Lopez's team quickly confirmed the incident to the press, calling it a serious security breach and announcing that her personal protection detail had been doubled. She was now under 24-hour armed surveillance, reportedly coordinated through a private intelligence firm hired by her attorneys. "Jen hasn't slept in 2 nights, said a close friend, speaking anonymously to Page 6.
She's not scared for her career.
She's scared for her life. Federal investigators took notice, fast-tracking a protective custody protocol usually reserved for high-risk whistleblowers. By that afternoon, the FBI's Organized Crime Division had dispatched agents to review the footage and examine the home's perimeter. What they discovered raised even more alarms. A hidden audio recording device had been placed near the property line, its battery still active. "This isn't just intimidation," said a former FBI profiler interviewed on CNN. "It's surveillance. Classic pre-retaliation behavior." Behind the scenes, things were escalating. J.Lo's legal team had begun receiving threatening emails and texts, all from encrypted or disposable accounts. One message read, "Some stories are worth forgetting. You were protected once." Another simply said, "The island never happened." The language was familiar, eerily echoing what Lopez had testified just days before. She had told the courtroom how Diddy once joked, "You'll never sing again if you talk." Now, the threat no longer sounded like a punchline from the past, it felt like a reactivated order. For years, Lopez had been guarded with her words. Those close to her knew there were things she refused to discuss, not out of shame but out of fear. That fear now had shape. Enter the FBI's lead cybercrime unit. Investigators traced the metadata on one threatening message to a burner phone purchased in New Jersey and used for less than 6 hours. It pinged twice off a tower near Manhattan's Lower East Side, the same area where one of Diddy's production companies operated. Though circumstantial, the pattern wasn't missed. What drove the investigation forward, though, was a single forwarded email, anonymously sent to Lopez's lawyers and later shared with federal prosecutors. The email thread appeared to involve a fixer, a professional damage control specialist often used in high-profile scandals. The thread referenced a payment for containment consulting and included one chilling line. Client requests assurance that female witnesses' cooperation is reversed, permanently if necessary. Though the email had no names, no specific references, and had been scrubbed of sender data, investigators were able to tie the phrasing to known clients of a former crisis handler who once worked with Combs Global. That handler, who had since gone independent, refused comment but lawyered up within 48 hours of the FBI knocking on his door. Meanwhile, the FBI began cross-referencing the details with Lopez's private security logs. One startling discovery: a former dancer in J. Lo's 2000s-era tour crew had contacted her team the previous week, saying she had kept quiet long enough and wanted to testify. Her statement, delivered in private to investigators, painted a troubling picture. "She was paranoid for years," the dancer said of Lopez. "She used to change hotel rooms mid-tour. She never told us why. She just said she couldn't afford to be followed." The dancer also confirmed hearing Lopez speak cryptically of the island weekend and how someone once showed her a photo from it that she hadn't realized had been taken. She never found out who took the photo, but it vanished soon after. According to the dancer's sworn affidavit, Lopez once asked a bodyguard whether she could legally erase certain files from her digital footprint. "She told me, I was part of something I didn't understand at the time. Now I wish I could unsee it." The statement added further weight to the theory that Lopez had lived in fear, not just from what she witnessed, but from who else knew she had witnessed it. Federal agents now suspected a systematic campaign had been carried out for over 2 decades. The goal? Keep every potential witness quiet. Either through NDAs, financial compensation, psychological pressure, or, in more extreme cases, intimidation. Journalists digging deeper into the story began surfacing coincidences that no longer felt coincidental. A sound technician who worked at Bad Boy Studios in 2001? Killed in a motorcycle crash. Case unsolved. A former stylist who once tweeted about a Nightmare Island trip. Account deleted, never heard from again. A former background vocalist for Lopez who once filed a lawsuit claiming emotional distress? Settled out of court, NDA signed, no press coverage. The walls were closing in, and fast. Lopez's public silence only amplified the noise. Every paparazzi photo of her, face downturned, eyes behind dark glasses, sparked a flurry of speculation. But she never cracked. Never commented. Her team issued only one additional statement. Ms. Lopez has complied fully with all federal requests. She will not be intimidated. Still, those in the industry were watching and reacting. A major fashion brand quietly postponed its campaign launch featuring Diddy. A music awards ceremony removed his name from their guest list. An insider from a leading talent agency leaked that no one wants to be the next name dragged into this. The fear was real. And it was spreading. Yet amid the darkness, one thing had changed. Lopez was no longer alone. 2 other witnesses had stepped forward, according to sources close to the investigation. One was a former manager who handled logistics for the 1999 retreat. The other? A private chef who cooked for the guests that weekend. Both were now under federal protection. And both reportedly had receipts, emails, calendar invites, even expense reports. The walls weren't just closing in on Diddy. They were caving in. And still, the most pressing question remained unanswered. How many others had stayed quiet? And for how long? The next breakthrough didn't come from a courtroom or a private island. It came from a soundproofed room deep inside a now-shuttered recording studio in Manhattan's meatpacking district, a place once known as Echo House. It was here, Jennifer Lopez testified, that things really started to feel dangerous. At the time, Echo House was one of Diddy's preferred creative spaces. On the surface, it was a sleek, ultramodern recording facility that had hosted everyone from Mary J. Blige to Nas. But Lopez's recollection painted a more disturbing picture of a space where music was sometimes the secondary focus. "I was told to show up at midnight," she told federal investigators. "That's when the sessions happened. That's when people talked off the record." Lopez described being invited to a late-night meeting at the studio in the summer of 2000. She had just released her debut album on the 6th, and Diddy was in talks to co-produce new material. She arrived alone, expecting to discuss beats and verses. Instead, she was ushered past the main control room and into a dim, glass-walled lounge with tinted panels and no cameras. She was offered wine. She declined. Then came the music, loud, bass-heavy, thumping enough to shake the floor. It wasn't about the track, she recalled. It was about the noise covering what people were really saying. What followed, according to Lopez, was a tense and murky conversation in which Diddy reminded her that no one needs to go back to that island. She said his tone wasn't aggressive, more like a threat disguised as casual advice. He told her she had a bright future, that her name was growing, that bad press could change everything. "It was the first time I realized the studio wasn't just for recording," she said. "It was also for erasing things." That phrase, erasing things, would later prove critical. Federal agents soon subpoenaed Echo House's surviving hard drives. Though the studio officially closed in 2013, investigators managed to recover partial archives stored off-site by a third-party engineering firm. What they found shocked even seasoned analysts. Among the digital files were fragments of audio recordings from late-night sessions, some incomplete, some corrupted, but a few still intact. In one clip, a male voice alleged to be Diddy's could be heard saying, "If we do this right, no one's gonna ask what happened. Not her. Not him. Not anybody." The voice wasn't identified with 100% certainty, but 3 former engineers confirmed under oath that it was consistent with his speaking patterns. That wasn't the only disturbing find. A search of the studio's back offices uncovered non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, signed and unsigned, stuffed in a drawer behind a stack of abandoned invoices. Some were blank. Others had names. One bore Lopez's name at the top, though it was never signed. But perhaps most chilling was the discovery of a handwritten ledger found behind a sound panel in the beer room booth. The notebook contained dates, initials, and odd annotations like silence equals 10K, no phone, and press equals bad. It was never clear who wrote it. Word of these discoveries leaked within days, and the music world reeled. What fans once thought of as creative sanctuaries were being reframed as sites of intimidation, manipulation, and control. Lopez's testimony also highlighted a particular track recorded in 2001, an unreleased demo that had long been the subject of fan speculation. The song, called Confession Glass, was pulled from streaming platforms within hours of the chapter's events going public. The lyrics were subtle but, in hindsight, deeply revealing. "I can't speak of the waves on the sand. Can't say where the fire began. Locked in a rhythm that no one can break. And silence is the only sound we make." Online sleuths quickly dubbed it the Island Song. Theories exploded. Did J.Lo sneak her truth into the lyrics? Was it a veiled cry for help? And if so, who else knew? One of the producers credited on the demo, a once prominent sound engineer known only as Miles J., broke his silence in an anonymous interview with The Intercept. He said he had been paid to forget the sessions tied to that track. "I was handed a manila envelope after the second day of recording," he said. "No receipts. Just cash. I asked no questions. Looking back, I should have asked a lot of questions." Federal investigators reportedly reached out to Miles J. shortly after the interview was published. Whether he testified or entered into a cooperation deal remains undisclosed. But the dominoes were falling. 2 other engineers who worked sessions at Echo House filed affidavits saying they had been pressured to delete raw vocals and wipe stems from the servers after certain sessions. One of them admitted that he secretly backed up encrypted copies of the drives, fearing he might need protection one day. Those backups were now in FBI custody. Meanwhile, media outlets began to question just how many tracks across the early 2000s pop and hip-hop canon might contain hidden traces of something darker, codes, confessions, or simply moments captured in reverb that were never meant to be heard again. Lopez, in her statements, was careful never to accuse other artists of wrongdoing. "Most people were just trying to make music," she said. But there were times where it felt like music was just the excuse to get people in the room. As word spread, Echo House became a symbol of the industry's unseen underworld. Journalists compared it to infamous Hollywood casting couch scenarios, but even that felt inadequate. This wasn't about opportunity being abused. This was about memory being manipulated. The studio may have shut down. The walls may have been torn apart during demolition. But the ghosts were still talking, and they weren't just whispering. They were singing. The next phase of the investigation moved away from recording booths and whisper threats, and into spreadsheets, wire transfers, and offshore ledgers. Jennifer Lopez had told investigators to follow the money, and now, with mounting pressure from both the public and federal prosecutors, they did exactly that. Her testimony identified several shell companies she claimed were regularly referenced in passing during private conversations with Diddy's associates. One name stood out: Starline Pacific Limited. Though it sounded like a logistics firm, it had no employees, no public website, and no office listings, only a series of tangled addresses registered in Panama, the British Virgin Islands, and, oddly, a P.O. box in Des Moines, Iowa. Forensic accountants brought in by the FBI linked the company to a cluster of offshore entities with vague names like Blue Origin Trust and Velour Trading Group, all with overlapping directors, most of whom were deceased, retired, or completely untraceable. At first, the accounts tied to Starline Pacific Limited seemed dormant. But then investigators stumbled upon a 2004 payment, $147,000 wired from a Miami bank to a Swiss account under Starline's name, flagged at the time by a now-defunct internal compliance team but never pursued. The memo line reads simply, "Consultation fee, event retainer." The date matched the week following the alleged private footage erasure at Echo House. From there, the paper trail widened. Another entity, Senmark Holdings, had issued large recurring payments to a luxury yacht rental company based in St. Lucia. The same company, investigators discovered, had chartered a vessel to the island referenced in the 1999 incident. Passenger records were mysteriously missing, but the manifest included a single name with initials matching Diddy's known alias at the time, SC. Jennifer Lopez also testified that in early 2001, she overheard Diddy discussing an accountant named Ruben. She wasn't sure of his full name, only that Diddy told someone to run it through Ruben in Panama. A quick search by agents confirmed a Ruben Valdez had registered at least 7 shell companies in Panama between 1998 and 2005, 6 of which had since dissolved. But one, Valstra Limited, was still active and tied to a London-based music distribution company. Valstra's bank records, unsealed by court order, revealed a $1.2 million payment from Combs Enterprises dated May 2000. The payment was logged as Creative Development Fund. The receiving account moved the money within 2 days to a series of microtransactions that eventually disappeared into crypto wallets long before Bitcoin was mainstream. When agents reached out to Valdez for questioning, his home in Panama City had already been cleared out. He was gone. Back in the U.S., the investigation intensified. A whistleblower, formerly employed on Diddy's financial team, came forward through an anonymous tip line. Using a voice modulator during initial interviews, the individual provided a document titled Vault 14 Summary, a spreadsheet they claimed was used internally to track reputation risk payouts, coded by incident and year. The entries were vague but unmistakable. V14-1999 BI, Street Bart's Retreat, 3 PAX, $410,000. V14-2000 NY, Echo Session, 1 PAX, $75,000. V14-2004 FLA, Footage Sweep, $60,000. PAX was believed to refer to individual participants or witnesses. The largest payout, $410,000, lined up perfectly with the Caribbean incident Lopez described. The whistleblower also confirmed that containment bonuses were built into tour budgets. If an incident occurred during travel or production, a portion of tour profits was silently reallocated as a disruption buffer. These buffers were then washed through shell firms and never appeared on official ledgers. And it went deeper. Investigators subpoenaed records from a luxury real estate firm in Miami known for working with celebrity clientele. The firm had sold a waterfront mansion in 2003 to a trust called Scorpio Orchid LLC. A year later, that mansion was used for a secretive afterparty tied to the release of one of Diddy's clothing line launches. Lopez's former stylist, who had attended the party, told authorities she had seen wads of cash in the kitchen, stacked and unmarked. "No security," she said. "Just a guy in a white suit with a walkie-talkie. He told us to take what you need, keep your phones off, and enjoy." By now, the IRS was fully involved. Treasury analysts combed through international records, and it became clear. For over 15 years, there had been a parallel economy operating behind Diddy's public empire. One filled with silent transactions, untraceable services, and vanishing intermediaries. Even Diddy's former manager, once considered fiercely loyal, was subpoenaed. Under questioning, he admitted that in 2002 he had flagged irregularities in accounting, but was told not to worry. When he pushed further, he was offered a bonus and a non-disclosure agreement, which he signed. Everyone was eating good, he admitted. No one wanted to blow the whole thing up. As news of the financial trail broke, the public reaction was explosive. Headlines screamed of celebrity corruption rings and dark money in entertainment. Journalists compared the scheme to corporate cover-ups in Silicon Valley and offshore banking scandals in politics. But this one had faces, famous, adored, once untouchable. And then came the most damning piece of evidence yet. A former forensic auditor who once worked freelance for a major record label came forward. He provided an email chain showing that in 2005, Diddy's team had requested a loss mitigation plan in the event of testimonial risk. Attached was a list of known associates who might flip under pressure, Lopez's name among them, highlighted in red. The plan included suggested payouts, character attacks, and legal delay tactics. The auditor quit the job shortly after reviewing the plan. Now, almost 20 years later, that file was Exhibit A in a growing federal case. Lopez never commented on the financials publicly, but her earlier statement to investigators remained chillingly accurate. "You'll know the truth when the money tells it to you." And finally, it was talking. It began quietly, the way powerful people withdraw when something becomes radioactive. First, it was a few Instagram unfollows, names like Pharrell, DJ Khaled, and French Montana. Then came a sudden, unexplained pause on a Diddy-sponsored documentary set to debut at a major streaming platform in August. The silence wasn't accidental. It was coordinated. Hollywood was turning its back. By the time Chapter 6 financial findings made headlines, the narrative had shifted. What had once been dismissed as tabloid drama was now viewed as a genuine systemic unraveling. The Jennifer Lopez deposition had opened the floodgates, but it was the money trail, the coded payments, and corroborating witnesses that made the machine grind to a halt. And at the center of the storm, Sean Combs, Diddy, was rapidly becoming persona non grata. A-list collaborators who had long praised his mentorship and creative genius now issued vague statements about letting justice run its course and standing with survivors. His name was quietly removed from a panel appearance at the Cannes Lions Festival. An upcoming tribute performance at the BET Awards was shelved, replaced last minute with a silence observed for victims of industry abuse. A former protégé who owed their breakthrough album to Diddy support went live on Twitch to say, "It's heartbreaking. But you got to draw the line. I don't want to be associated with what's coming." In truth, many knew what was coming. Behind the scenes, legal teams were scrambling. Several of Diddy's longtime business partners, including fashion executives, liquor brand stakeholders, and tour sponsors, had begun combing through their contracts for exit clauses. Multiple deals included a moral turpitude condition, language that allows for immediate cancellation of brand endorsements or partnerships if one party becomes a reputational liability. Within 5 days, Ciroc, one of Diddy's flagship liquor ventures, announced it would be re-evaluating its promotional strategy. Their logo was removed from Diddy's website less than 24 hours later. And then there was Revolt, the media empire Diddy had co-founded to give artists a voice. It was a platform that prided itself on independence, disruption, and authenticity. But even Revolt couldn't weather the storm. On a Friday afternoon, the company released a short, surgical press statement. Revolt is pausing all Diddy-affiliated projects pending the outcome of ongoing investigations. We stand by the truth, wherever it leads. Insiders later revealed that board members had been split over whether to issue that statement at all. Several had invested millions. Others were longtime friends. But public pressure had grown unbearable, and one board member reportedly said, "If we stay with him now, we die with him later." Meanwhile, Jennifer Lopez maintained her silence. Offers for interviews flooded her team's inbox, 60 Minutes, Vanity Fair, even Oprah. She declined them all. Instead, her team released a single photograph to Time magazine. An image of Lopez seated alone at a grand piano, eyes down, hands still. The caption read only, "I already spoke." The photo went viral. It symbolized what many saw as a turning point. Not just in the case, but in the entertainment industry as a whole. For decades, the code had been silence. Protect the brand. Protect the bag.
Keep the past buried.
But Lopez's decision to speak, and stay silent afterward, was being viewed as an act of controlled power. As other celebrities backed away from Diddy, they began offering private support to Lopez. Sources close to her said she received hundreds of messages from fellow performers, executives, and stylists who had seen and heard things over the years but had felt unable to act. One Grammy-winning artist allegedly wrote, "I wish I had your courage.
I saw what happened on that island.
I just never thought anyone would believe me." Meanwhile, the public kept score. Fan-made infographics began circulating online, tracking which celebrities had spoken out, which had unfollowed Diddy, and which remained silent. Several who hadn't commented found themselves under scrutiny. "Silence is complicity," one tweet read, tagging high-profile artists who had yet to make a statement. Even within music journalism circles, there was a reckoning. One former hip-hop reporter posted a now-deleted tweet, "We all heard stories. We just didn't want to lose access. I hate that I didn't speak when I had the chance." But perhaps the most jarring fallout came in the form of cancelled appearances. In the span of just 3 days, Diddy was removed from a surprise guest lineup at Coachella 2025. An in-production Netflix biopic about his life went into indefinite development hold. His statue, installed in a prominent section of the Universal Music Group's headquarters, was covered with a black cloth pending a permanent decision. The industry was severing ties faster than anyone expected. Even Combs himself seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. According to one insider, he had retreated to a private compound in Turks and Caicos, unreachable by phone and relying only on his most trusted advisors. His inner circle had shrunk to 3 people. "He knows it's collapsing," the source said. "He's not talking about image anymore. He's talking about lawyers." By the end of the week, several civil suits had been quietly filed in California and New York. Though the plaintiffs were unnamed, court documents indicated they were tied to past events Lopez had indirectly referenced in her testimony. The headlines read like a slow death knell. "The empire melts. Hollywood no longer answers Diddy's call." From mogul to liability, industry distances itself amid legal firestorm. Jennifer Lopez didn't burn bridges, she exposed who built them. And amid all of it, J. Lo remained out of the spotlight. No red carpets. No appearances. No Instagram stories. Only a brief message released via her attorney. "Ms. Lopez will not engage in public spectacle. She told the truth in court. That's where it belongs." As for Diddy, he issued one cryptic Instagram post, a black screen with white text that read, "Lions walk alone." The comments were disabled, but the silence surrounding it was deafening. It started with a rumor, passed between courthouse insiders and picked up by legal correspondents before it was ever officially acknowledged. The grand jury, which had been meeting in secret for weeks, was back in session. Not just reconvened, reactivated with sealed evidence. The tone had shifted. This wasn't about building a case anymore. It was about making a decision. By the second week of June, whispers began swirling through newsrooms. Indictments were imminent. According to an exclusive leak published in The Guardian, federal prosecutors had received new digital evidence, believed to include raw audio files from the Echo House studio backups, financial ledgers tied to offshore companies, and sworn affidavits from at least 2 witnesses present during the 1999 Caribbean incident. The scale of the investigation had grown beyond one testimony, beyond one incident. This was now a conspiracy case, sprawling across decades, international borders, and a web of shell corporations that prosecutors now alleged had been used to silence witnesses, obstruct justice, and launder reputational damage. And at the center of it all was Diddy. But he wasn't the only one. As reporters camped outside the Southern District of New York courthouse, the story reached a fever pitch. Names, once whispered in backstage corridors and studio boardrooms, were now being typed into sealed documents and reviewed by federal judges. Collaborators, enablers, accountants, fixers. One prosecutor, off record, called it the most star-adjacent criminal inquiry since Epstein. The public didn't have long to wait. On a Friday afternoon, the Department of Justice held a brief and unscheduled press conference. The assistant U.S. attorney stood stiffly before a podium and announced that multiple individuals were under formal investigation related to charges of witness tampering, obstruction, financial fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. He didn't say Diddy's name. He didn't need to. Within minutes, reporters confirmed that federal agents had raided Combs Global's Manhattan offices. Servers were taken. Staff were asked to leave. The building was cordoned off for 6 hours. The backlash was instant and overwhelming. Civil lawsuits began pouring in. 7 in the first 48 hours, most filed under pseudonyms, all citing emotional distress, reputational coercion, and long-term trauma related to incidents tied to Mr. Combs and his affiliates. At least one suit named Starline Pacific Limited directly, opening the door to potential civil RICO charges. If prosecutors could prove that Combs operated a long-term criminal enterprise under the guise of entertainment, the financial consequences could be astronomical. As if sensing the magnitude of what was to come, Jennifer Lopez finally broke her silence. The statement was just one sentence, emailed to every major outlet by her attorney. "I said what needed to be said." It was brief, deliberate, and devastating. For someone who had weathered 3 decades of intense scrutiny, it said everything without inviting further comment. Her words were printed on magazine covers, painted on protest signs, posted on TikTok backgrounds. Fans began calling it the sentence heard around the world. And with that, J.Lo went quiet again. But the storm around her only intensified. In the following days, a second wave of celebrity whistleblowers contacted federal investigators. One former pop star provided audio files. A former tour manager produced receipts and flight logs from the Street Barts trip. A Netflix documentary crew abandoned an in-progress music retrospective about Diddy's career. Instead, they pivoted to a new docu-series, The Silence Machine, Power, Fame, and the Cost of Staying Quiet. An anonymous juror leaked that the grand jury had been shown never-before-seen video clips, believed to be partial surveillance footage from the island. Faces were blurred, but voices were not. The cultural mood shifted overnight. This wasn't just scandal, it was a reckoning. Headlines weren't asking if Diddy would be indicted. They were asking who else would fall with him. By week's end, the Justice Department filed a motion to freeze assets linked to 6 shell companies, including 2 accounts suspected of funding hush payments. The motion cited ongoing concerns regarding witness retaliation and evidence destruction. And then came the final shock. Late Sunday night, the Southern District released heavily redacted court documents indicating that a cooperating witness had entered witness protection. Speculation surged. Was it one of the dancers? The former studio engineer? The chef from the retreat? But many believed it was the fixer. That belief was reinforced when several high-profile attorneys began quietly resigning from cases linked to Combs Global. One even submitted a letter to the court stating that due to a potential conflict of interest with federal witnesses, I must recuse myself. It was the kind of phrasing that set Twitter ablaze. And in the center of it all, Diddy remained silent. No public appearance. No statement. No lawyer press conferences. His social media had gone completely dark. For a man once known for extravagance and visibility, it was a deafening absence. But the damage was done. On Monday morning, the New York Times published an op-ed titled "The Empire That Built Itself on Silence." The piece chronicled Diddy's rise, his influence, and how unchecked power, money, and fame had allowed an alleged machine of manipulation to flourish for decades. It ended with a single line. What happens next depends on whether anyone else has the courage to speak. And as for Jennifer Lopez? She emerged 3 days later in a small cafe in upstate New York. A blurry photo captured her sipping tea beside a window, unbothered by the attention. She wore no makeup. No entourage. Just a gray sweater and the quiet look of someone who had already said everything that mattered. She wasn't vindictive. She wasn't smiling. She was just still. And for the first time in a long time, the world around her was listening. The truth was no longer whispered. It was broadcast. And there was no going back.